There we go. So welcome. Thank you for coming. I want to hear more about your background and where you come from. There's a bunch of things that you mentioned and a bunch of questions I have, but where I first saw you was on Johannes's channel, and you did apparently I think it was a poem that you had written, and it was connected to, I would imagine, what you were talking about with Deleuze and Heidegger, because you were taking a class of his and of Justin Murphy, and I clicked back to Justin's channel, which you are, and I'll put links to all this below so people can check this out too. But there was something that you said in that final class, I believe it was, where everyone went around and talked, and you were the first one to talk, and you talked about this tension between the unsayable, right, and the representation, and you and specifically, one of the things that got to me is that you're describing what happened in the class to some regard, of like this place where language, maybe they're not opposites, is what I heard you say. It's like maybe as language pulls forward, there's an overflow and things fade out that can't be said, but then there's places where it gathers and somehow shows itself, right, in the course of the dialogue. And I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what attracts me, whatever that spot is. And then I listen, and then listening to your poetry and some of the imagery that you put out I just thought was brilliant. That like with the ski lift, right, and the white enfrainment, right, underneath it, like, and all of the different poetry in your work. So I'm really excited to have you on, because I think what I sense is that you're listening to something that is like the source of poetry, and it's the source of art, and it's the source of something like philosophy. And I can hear you listening to it in some way. And I want to get close to that with you.
Great, thank you so much. That's really generous, and thanks for giving that introduction. I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, I think I think that's definitely true what you say about listening, and I think it's interesting about. I actually saw in one of your videos that you gave with the three other people, I can't remember the name of it now, but you were talking about fellowship and so on, and you mentioned how there can be different senses that kind of maybe if you close your eyes and you listen to music and you pick out an instrument, you're seeing that instrument as opposed to listening.
Yeah.
And I sort of sometimes think about creativity as a bit like that. It's definitely a listening, but whether it comes in, like, oftentimes I use meditation as a process, and it's definitely kind of a visual type of feedback for me. But it feels more like listening because, and I guess that's connected to what we were saying, just where you referenced where I was talking about, and in the Deleuze and Guattari course, about the ineffable and so on. And I was also talking about time slightly in that. And the interesting thing about listening is it's temporal. It's not something that's static, that can be contained, that can be immortalized in that way. And you know, the way Nietzsche has this phrase, which is, you know, we immortalize that which can live and fly no longer. Only dreary and mellow things, or it's something along those lines. But I think listening is a really good adjective because listening is dynamic, it's temporal, and it's not something, you know, that can be fully grasped at any particular moment in time. It's about a process. So and
a Banison one too, like with sound, like sound is what it is because the moment it vanishes or fades away. So there is something that you can't quite grasp, right? However, in this interesting way, we're responding to it, and you can respond to it, right? And I think listening, I think, is one of the ways that I would say, and just referencing what you're talking about, this idea that, like, on one level, the senses is an organ, like with your eyes. But at another level, you can see it as a capacity, so that you can, like, close your eyes and listen to the music. And then when you look for the trumpet, the capacity sense that you're using is sight, right? Not
Yeah.
necessarily sound. So there's kind of quality of like these capacities for being. And I just get the
Mhm.
sense that there is a way where I in some way, even though it's ineffable, right? And it's
Mhm.
unsayable, there's a way in which we can still relate to it, right?
Mm. Yes, and I think that's really interesting, and that's kind of what I was. Yeah, I think that's something that we're both really interested in. Like, there's some sort of phenomenological experience of the ineffable. Like, a sense of wonder is definitely a sense, and I also think that the drive to try to describe it, even in a representational way or any sort of way, is extremely generative. So that wouldn't be the case if it was completely beyond our grasp.
Yeah,
There's some sort of feedback there, or some sort of beautiful trail that you can kind of trace. So yeah.
absolutely. And you talked about, what's interesting too, is I want to hear a little bit about your, well, well, clearly like you do art, and you can see that a lot of your life seems to be about making art. I want to hear more about that. But there's also this quality of a philosophical sense, indeed, right? And I think you talked about going to school in Berkeley. Like, yeah,
Mm,
and you're from Ireland, right? Correct? Where were you born,
yes.
and how did you turn out to be such a listener?
Yeah, well, I'm from Ireland. I began studying law and French in Trinity as my undergrad. And that was how I began. And I guess, it's quite funny because I had a lot of questions, and I began reading Plato, and I was sort of thinking about Plato's cave and things. But I found when I was writing the law essays, it's kind of like you introduce the essay with all these questions, like, should it be this way? Should it be another way? But then the conclusion always had to be, well, the way it is now is more or less okay. And these are the laws and that was pretty much the structure of what the essays would be
Right.
like, at least in my experience of first year in law.
Yeah.
So I basically decided I wanted to sort of look at things from the ground up. I wanted to question everything. I had that sort of philosophical vocation. So I changed to
Mm,
philosophy in Trinity in Dublin. And then I did my third year in Berkeley. And
mm,
that was a really it was a great experience for me. That's when I started getting more into art and stuff like that. I did a
oh,
performance art piece while I was over there. And I began reading more European philosophers because they weren't really part of the course in Dublin. So people like Heidegger and Nietzsche and so on. And yeah, I just became really inspired then to sort of create and to sort of listen and be in the world in a different way. And so that's yeah, and now I'm studying for a master's in art writing, and
mm.
also doing music stuff at the same time. So yeah, that's pretty much the background.
A master's in art writing.
Yes.
That seems like that sounds like a distinctive thing that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it. It's only the third year of the masters, and there
Mm,
was another one by its name, I think, in Goldsmiths, but it's very much a sort of discipline that's sort of forming,
hmm.
and it's kind of like, um, often people think of it about as writing about art, but it's more writing. In the description they have in the masters or whatever, they say writing as for and about art, and I
Mm.
kind of take it as the writing as art. So it's kind of a little bit like
As
creative
art.
writing,
Right.
except it's a little bit broader, and it's more in a contemporary art context than a traditional literary context. So you can be a bit more experimental with it.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. So writing as art. That's so interesting. Yeah, and that you had on one of your actually when I was looking through some of your work, there was the sense in which you were selling a book that you had written, but there was something about it where I wasn't quite sure what exactly I would be buying. Was I buying the thing that you wrote? Was I buying the smudges that you left? Like, what was I buying? There was this open question that spoke to me
Mhm.
when you. So as you say that, like, oh yeah, writing as art, that really says it. At least my little experience with I touched in on. You said
Mm.
in the email, and this really struck me. you talked about, it was in Berkeley when being opened itself to me. And I think you talked
Yes,
about a
so
specific moment, right? I got the sense of,
yeah, I mean,
yeah, please.
I think there's different times and that happens. And there is I think it's in, the Heidegger essay about Rilke's angel, where he speaks about, that moment in the first, it's a quote from Rilke, I believe. And he says something like, those first few moments of love where your heart kind of opens and a new horizon opens up. I don't have the exact quote on me, probably have it somewhere, but
Yeah.
but anyway, I think there are moments like that can happen throughout one's life. And it definitely wasn't the only time that it happened, but there was a significant time in Berkeley where I just felt, I guess I became more confident in writing in a more creative way.
Mm,
And also I had this amazing seminar on Heidegger, and I literally just remember reading it. And just as we were describing about that sense of wonder, that sense of the unsayable, of the great being, sort of coming through in an interesting way. And I really felt it palpably at that time, and it was just a great time. So yeah, so I
amazing.
thought it was wonderful that you're in California, and
Oh yeah, it's a
yeah.
full circle coming back in some sense. Yeah,
Yes.
totally. In that sense of, when you talked about the questions have always been really spoken to you, right?
Mm.
And what is that in you that responds? Like if we say,
Yeah.
like, is like, if the question mark, right? Like, for a lot of people, I think as they get older, right, especially as they get older, the squiggly part disappears, right? And then all is left is a period, right? And then they live within those things, right? But what
Mhm.
I'm hearing is that the squiggly part, I'm imagining, gets more. I get a sense of a
Yeah.
moreness around the
Mhm.
questions.
To a certain degree, but I also think that I had a lot of the sort of traditional rationalist kind of philosophical doubts of everything when I was kind of old adolescent or
Mhm,
so,
mhm,
or like when I was beginning my undergraduate studies. And now, um, I guess just from reading Heidegger and experiencing wonder in the world, experiencing a feeling of
mhm.
collective love and so on. Um, sorry, it sounds cheesy whenever you label these things. That's why better not to it's better not to try to label them. But
Right,
I guess I have more of a feeling of, it's more of a faithful kind of questioning now than a doubtful one. So
right.
it's less I wouldn't say violent, but sort of, it's less all encompassing, because there's a sort of ground level sort of faith or optimism. Um, so yeah.
A ground level faith or optimism, because that's one of the things that's striking to me. Because I remember when I was in art school, the last thing I would say was that the ground for most of the students was an optimism, right?
Mm,
In fact, that was one of the things that was really odd for me in going
yeah.
to art school, was I thought, I didn't realize that I thought this until I got there and it wasn't there, was I thought my going to art school was going to be filled with these conversations about
Mm,
these lively conversations. And actually what was
yeah.
there was like a bunch of really closed in
Yeah.
angsty folks.
Yeah.
And I don't, not that you don't, I'm sure you have angst, but I sense in you, and tell me if this is true, I think you just talked about it, I sense a fundamental, something fundamental in you that says, no, it's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like, obviously, there's a lot of things to be worried about, and it's important to be concerned and so on. Um, but I guess just on a personal level, I have, I have, yeah, I have quite a lot of faith and love in my life, and I'm very grateful for it. So,
Mhm.
um, and yeah, I like that. That's it, really. But Yeah, it's difficult. I was reading Donna Haraway, and she kind of talks about, you can't have hope or despair. You have to stay with the trouble, and
Mm,
I think there's a degree of truth to that, but I also think there's a type of staying with the trouble which is hopeful. It doesn't mean you have to have an abstract, futuristic model of what you think hope should be, but you can have a sort of critical awareness which is hopeful.
right.
Mm,
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you have a lot of love in your life and and a lot, a lot of faith.
mhm.
What do you mean by that? What is that? What do you mean by love
Yeah.
and faith? Yeah.
Uh, I don't know. I guess, like, for me it's just I think a lot of it is just I'm on quite a spiritual path, and um yeah, I feel very protected, and I feel very
Mm,
supported in that way. And yeah, I also like obviously it's difficult with lockdown and stuff, but on a practical level, like, I think it's helped doing that has helped my relations and has helped my perspective on the world. And
uh,
yeah, that's bringing good things. So but
mm,
mostly it's just, I think that it's that I do believe in sort of like a base level and a slightly foundationalist, maybe philosophical view, possibly, in that for me anyway, that base level sense of meaning is necessary for my well-being. That's what I found over the last few years, because it wasn't always the case that I was
mm.
on that sort of path. So yeah.
Something happened something turned a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it like a, was it like just an insight, or did you like kind of have an experience, or because what
um
actually when you said, I just want to just reflect back when you said, I feel protected. Like I feel
mhm.
protected. Um, when I want to understand what exactly you mean by that, but I got this sense is that you're actually speaking to something like, there's something about the constitution of what is, right? Not like,
Yeah.
not like someone's protecting me or some things protect. I sensed
Mhm.
like an unconditionality in that regard,
Mhm.
that speaks to what I heard you say, is speaks to my ability to even look at painful things and have the inquiry start from that I'm doing it because it's good, or a
Mm.
sense of the goodness, this like sense of protection in the goodness, in the good.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think that's definitely getting at something. It's yeah. Could you just repeat what you said about, so a protection being a foundation more so than a particular person? Is
Yeah, it
that
was
is
my
that kind of?
sense when you said protection. You said, I have a lot of love in my life and I feel very protected, right? And I was
Yeah.
like, I wasn't expecting you to say that, but my sense is that you weren't necessarily just talking about a circumstance in which you felt protected, but more like
Mm.
an ontological sense of the
Yes.
constitution of things, or the ground in some way, or the
Yeah.
groundless ground, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, I think it's interesting because I think I'm quite modest at the, like, more modest than I was about making statements about what I believe reality to be like.
Yeah.
But um I do feel
Mm,
like, personally, I believe a lot of things, like that I am a lot of responsible for the reality that I create, and you know um that I consciously sort of embody. So that feeling of responsibility then, you
uh,
know, is empowering, but also gives a sense of sort of like protection, because it's like, and it's not sort of, it's difficult because it's not sort of like a very, I don't want to say it's all individualistic and everybody's faith is different or something.
yeah.
But I also don't feel inclined to sort of, I guess because I'm sort of at the, it's precisely because these sorts of things are ineffable, and when you try to sort of make grand claims about them, it can often be dogmatic or limiting to other people. So I'm always cautious about making sort of ontological claims for wider especially when it comes to sort of spiritual or faith, you know. But that's how I feel about it. But it's difficult. I guess it's one of the differences maybe between a sort of a spirituality or a spiritual path and a religious path, maybe, you know, that
Mm-hmm.
hesitancy around dogma or around doctrine, you know. But yeah.
Well, I sense it's kind of like what I'm hearing you say is I really appreciate what you're saying of like, there is something weird when you try to say the unsayable, that
Mm-hmm.
there's a way that something gets concealed in becoming a proposition that you can start to do stuff with that is very not what you meant,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
What's interesting to me is like, I think what I was really asking about was if we say that the set, and what it's funny, I'd never quite heard it like this before, but when he talked about a responsibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking to myself as I was listening to you, kind of like another track in my mind was like, oh yeah, there's something you're responding to. And then you
Mm.
talked, and then in that moment you said like responsibility, that you feel that there's I bring something to it.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is like I was like, oh yeah, and this is my experience. I've noticed with myself and other people is that to really hear them is to not hear necessarily what they're saying. To really hear
Mm.
them or to see them is to see the world that grants themselves already being in the response and what that reveals. And I got that sense in which, oh, that's a really different way of talking about responsibility that I like.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. And I think that's really admirable and great to try to step into another person's world like that, you know. But I also think it's a really interesting analogy between sort of the ineffability of somebody else's world, but also the ineffability of the world, and a sort of trying to be listening or trying to be attuned to both, you know, is like a very worthwhile
Yes.
task, you know.
Attunement. There's another good word.
Mhm. Yes, it could, yeah, it's sort of similar to listening, but it's a
Yeah.
lovely word. Yeah.
Yeah. Attunement. Interesting. And so the spirituality, like even the sense of the pause in your carefulness, right? I sense, this is what I sense in that, is that there, even in that, you're responding, you're disclosing something in that response, right?
Mhm.
That sounds like something like sacred to me, and
Mm.
that you're cautious in giving propositions. It's interesting, just the sense of like when I step inside of being cautious, that already seems to presuppose that my eyes on something, right? I'm already concerned about something. It's addressing
Yeah.
something, or something's addressing me.
Yes.
And I get the sense in your work that you're saying these a couple different things. Like
Mhm.
you're talking about a mutual address of some kind.
Mm.
And something about all that when I think about feeling protected.
Yes.
What do you mean by protected? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. You know, I certainly just there where you were speaking, I thought of the ancient skeptic who just used to like he wouldn't say anything, he'd just raise his pinky finger, you know, and that was like, you know,
Yeah.
just yeah. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, I I don't know, like it's very interesting. But I do, you know, the other thing I was thinking about is sort of Wittgenstein and like the distinction between showing and saying, and I think that's really important for me. And I think that's why I became, when I started to sort of, I guess, be interested in spiritual, mystical kind of matters, um, that really became, that the importance of that became evident to me. And
Mhm.
I guess that's also connected to my reluctance to sort of speak propositionally about these things, because I think that's where, you know, that's where art and poetry have a place, is that they can show something like this and it reveals itself more poignantly and more truthfully, in my opinion, than in a stated way, you know. So yeah, that's what I'd say about that. Yeah.
Mm,
Even though
mm,
that's clearly much of proposition. So,
yeah.
it's the it's a
Yeah,
contradiction,
so
but you
you're
know what I mean.
acknowledging, and the carefulness. This carefulness has to do something with what I heard you say is like had to do something with saying. So one of the ways that you are careful, right, is through this distinction between saying and showing, because there's something about showing versus saying, right, that, yeah, like if you were to complete that sentence.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I think with showing and saying, it's like, well, I guess when we're talking about sacred things, I think it's important to try our best to show them as opposed to say them, because I personally believe those sorts of truths need to be revealed in a showing rather than a saying. So given if we're on this subject matter, and it's also something that interests me a huge amount, I that's why I'm interested in discursive technique, which is more poetical or artistic, because it allows these things to be shown or to be revealed as opposed to be sort of stated
Mm,
propositionally.
hmm. I got this sense as you were writing, like when I imagined you writing it,
Hmm.
I got this sense of like somewhere in between, and I'm probably just projecting my
Yeah.
own experience on you, but I really got the sense that some of these images that you were
Mm.
using, like the ski lift and the that imagining you, I was like imagining you writing it and then
Yeah.
reading it and then getting it right, like in some way, right? There's,
Yeah.
yeah,
A hundred
it
percent.
showed
No,
itself
that's
to you.
yeah, that's 100% what I try to make my methodology these days is, yeah, to sort of receive, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I can sort of interpret it afterwards, but I basically just try to listen, and I often that through meditation or through whatever means, and mostly through meditation, but
Right.
and then I receive something, and I might not fully, whether you want to say it's from the subconscious or it's from God or whatever, that something happens, and then I sort of interpret that or analyze it afterwards. So that was very much the process of
Mm,
that piece of writing.
mm,
But I sort of included this sort of analysis. It wasn't just sort of going through imagery. But yeah, it's kind of also in like, lots of people said to me it's kind of dreamy, and I was like, that's not surprising, because those sort of states, they're sort of somewhere in between waking and dreaming almost.
yeah, yeah,
Mm,
absolutely. So it's so that's actually that's your, what I heard you say is like that's what I try to make my methodology, is that
mm,
place where I write something and then I find out what was written,
mm-hmm.
right? That
Yes.
showing as a methodology. And so one of the
Mm-hmm.
ways that you do that is a meditation,
Mm-hmm.
if you're
Yeah.
listening, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about the meditation. What's meditation like for you?
It's fine. I mean, I just like, because sometimes, like, for example, like a few days ago, I've been meditating a lot the last few days,
Hmm,
because I'm trying to write uh, a few pieces of music. And what yeah, I get a lot of visuals when I close my eyes, when I meditate.
hmm,
Often when I'm not even focusing, I get a lot of visuals.
yeah.
And so basically it just involves, I just sort of quieten down, try not to necessarily question or interpret the visuals straight away.
Hmm,
And then I just listen to the sound of my breath and wait for them to sort of pass, or
hmm,
to sort of show themselves. And then, yeah, then usually I hear what I need to hear. So it's good.
hmm,
Yeah.
hmm.
Mm.
So there is a kind of sense in which where you sit down and yeah, you listen, and there sounds like there's a synesthesia, almost something happening underneath your eyes. That was another thing
Mhm.
that you wrote in the poem, right? You talked about, I
Yeah.
think, like these sense of these flashes or something underneath the eyes that turn into
Mhm.
something, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
and break in.
Yeah, I get that a lot. And at first I found it a little scary, but I actually think it's a huge resource, and I'm very grateful for it. Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm also just curious about the Irish
Yeah.
from Ireland. Yeah.
So,
And
yeah, I'm from Ireland. My mum's parents are English.
mhm,
Um, and my dad's parents are Irish. Like, he's
mhm,
Irish back generations. So yeah. But I am quite interested in sort of, I guess I'm interested in slightly like indigenous ways of being in the world as well. And
mm,
Irish language is one way of accessing that. And yeah, I'm basically working on like an album at the moment, and I'm sort of looking at Irish fairy tales and different types of fairy tales. I think there's just a lot of ancient wisdom in them,
yeah.
um, and I think it's a really interesting way to sort of, like, whether it's modernity or civilization or whatever you want to call it, just to kind of get underneath it, to sort of get a different perspective, it's like, it's one way of doing that. So
Yeah. Just interested in it. You said that a
mhm.
number of times in the interview. That strikes my attention, being interested in it. I get the sense of like that place where you listen or where you hear, right? And looking through, reading the Irish mythology. And because I'm it's funny, I when I read people like Yeats, and or
Mhm.
I hear like the folk tales of the Irish,
Mhm.
I feel a nostalgia that for
Mhm.
something that I on some level I shouldn't have the nostalgia. I've often
Yeah.
been wondering like what it is it about the Irish that speak to
Mm.
something this this strange but deep, I don't know, like some
Mm.
historical sense. Like I'm but absent of any specific memory.
Yes, that's very interesting. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I think that it's me. I think I probably have a drive like that as well. And
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's all, yeah. But I think it's also just kind of, yeah, slight nostalgia for, or just also just love for this place. It's just so beautiful, and the landscape and everything, and you can almost feel the stories and the music kind of coming from it. So it's like, it's very nice. Yeah,
And
like, I'm based in Ireland at the moment, so yeah.
that's how it sings to you, and you live there, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you live there, and so there's
Hmm.
the experience of that really speaking to you.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Are you from like a smaller town in Ireland, or
Yeah, so I'm from a place called Hoth, which is about, it's lovely. It's about 40 minutes from the city center, but we have like cliffs and a hill, and it's like quite like the countryside, even though it's quite close to Dublin.
mhm.
Um so yeah, I grew up here basically. I lived in another seaside town until I was about 9. Um
Mm.
but yeah, it's a lovely place. Yeah.
Wow. And do you have does your family still live there? Do you have a
Um, yeah, so my parents are here. I mean, I was in Glasgow, but I came back because of the COVID. So I'm here now, and my parents are here. The
Mhm.
rest of my family are basically scattered. My brother's in Dublin, but other people are in other places. Yeah,
Okay,
at
got it.
Belgium and Barcelona. Yeah,
And you said your dad's from Ireland and your mom's from
yeah.
London. Okay.
Well, my mum, she grew up in Ireland. She is Irish. She like her, but her parents moved from England when they were like in their 20s, and then
Right.
she was born in Ireland.
Okay, got
So
it. And then
yeah,
your dad's from his parents were born in Ireland.
yeah, his
Yeah.
parents are from Kerry, in Ireland. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Got you. I
Hmm.
have not been to Ireland yet.
Oh,
But
yeah.
there's something about the Irish spirit that so intrigues me.
Mm.
And I
Yes,
think
it
it's a
is
little bit what you're
interesting.
talking about. It's a little bit something about that one, there's a sense of home and locality that's
Mm,
that's almost transcendent, right? I just get this sense, like
mm,
in this way that I can be nostalgic. It can evoke nostalgia in me for something, a place that I've never been, right?
mm.
Something really speaks to me about that,
Yeah.
and something about this way that language does seems like something language comes right off. Even the accent, the Irish accent seems to come right off the mountains and the grass and the. It's always
Hmm.
my sense of it.
Yeah. No,
Hmm.
I think that's true. It's very interesting. Um, yeah.
And so the where do you feel like you're like with your art and stuff? Like
Mhm.
you're. Could I ask you how old are you?
So I'm 26.
You're 26. Mhm.
Wait, am I 27 now? I might be 27 now. What year?
Exactly the same way. Yeah. So you may be somewhere between
Born
26
in
and 27.
1993. So
Yeah.
I think I'm 27 now. Yeah, unfortunately.
Right.
I was 26 up until recently. But yeah, I to be honest with you, I I think I want to focus on the music for the next while at least. Yeah,
Mm,
I'd love to get an album together. So I'm just sort of
mm.
working on that at the moment. And yeah.
And the music
Mhm.
being so tell me a little bit about the music. Is it like solo? Is it
Mhm.
what is if
So yeah, so I'm basically writing the songs at the moment, and I would be singing them, and then in terms of like, I don't, I probably, I might be working with another musician as well, for instrumental, but I think I'll probably also, I'm doing a course in sound design at the moment, so I'm trying to learn how to sort of program the majority of it,
yeah.
so yeah, so it'll be kind of like, yeah, but it's I'm thinking it's sort of based off like fairy tales and stuff like that at the moment,
Mm,
and yeah, I think it will have a slightly folky kind of vibe,
yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah. That's
Mm,
that the the folky kind of vibe. And one of the things I was wondering about where like it seemed like what well when you in the poetry that you wrote,
mm,
you really did incorporate like Heidegger and Deleuze,
mhm.
and you spoke of them
Yeah.
directly in the sense of this sense of the in framing or tech this kind of way that
Mhm.
technology becomes our only mode of being and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Was that something was that something that really opened up for you or that sense of things in that class? Like I'm just curious about being an artist, right? And
Mhm.
right being definitely younger than me. I'm 48. Um, but it's kind of standing at the threshold of being an artist in this world, in this time, right? With
Mm,
technology,
mm,
I don't even know what that means. I have a sense of I don't have any idea what that even means being you. Um,
mhm.
so is that like with your music, is that a part of like what you're kind of pointing out and writing about is the technology and the and framing and some of the things that you
Yes.
pointed to.
I suppose like indirectly, I guess I'm sort of I am very interested in that and sort of trying, but I also am interested in sort of a positive response to it as opposed to just a critical kind of like, this is bad, So
Yeah.
um because of that, I guess what I'm interested in is
Yeah.
those areas where it's not like a rejection of rationality or something like that, but it's maybe a rejection of a certain type of translation of rationality, which is like a crude, uh, oversimplified, mathematical reduction or so.
Yeah.
So instead, it's like that's why I'm interested in sort of myth and folklore and so on, is because it's kind of like it's a way of understanding. It's still a kind of understanding, but it's got
Mhm.
this color and depth that I feel like can be extremely helpful for us now. And also, I just on a personal level, like I feel a lot of these tales, like they really resonate and they really ring true
Mm,
still, and
mm,
it's like there is a certain truth to them. So I'm and it's there's also an element of personal expression as well. Like I'm using ones that appeal to me for whatever reason. And um yeah
mm.
so I guess in terms of the technology thing, it's just, yeah, I guess, yeah, maybe looking for some sort of escape, but not an escape that's like a rejection, more of a sort of
Right.
a positive contribution or something like that.
Yeah, totally. I'm just curious because I like, and also being an artist, I remember when I was in art school, one of the most incredible things that I heard of an art teacher was during a critique. And
Mm.
he somehow kind of relieved a tension I didn't even know I had, which was
Yeah.
he was talking about how being an artist is not like a business decision, right? It's like,
Mhm.
look, for if like the odds are that you'll make money and be successful in that way doing art, like it's
Mhm.
just stupid to look at it that way. And
Yeah.
what he said is it's like, but if you see it as it's actually a lifestyle decision.
Mm.
And I remember like I don't even think I was consciously thinking about what I was going to do after art school
Mhm.
all that much. It
Yeah.
wasn't present to me
Mm.
at that time in my life, which was in
Yeah.
my late 20s. Um,
Mhm.
but I remember feeling this relief that
Mm.
um,
Mm.
on some level, even though at a certain point in my life it made sense to consciously stop doing art, right? So I
Yes.
could really like focus in a particular way on a particular thing, which is
Mhm.
circling, which is the thing that we can talk about that at some point too. But um, that it always has this sense in which like being an artist in the sense what the relief I felt was that it gives you this freedom, right,
Mm.
to respond to the world in whatever
Mm.
way allows my creativity and the thing I'm listening to and responding to be the central point in my life, right?
Yeah.
Like the moments if I put like a a business plan over the top of that, right?
Mhm.
It's no longer going to be what it is in some sense, but like,
Yeah.
and I've actually lived that way. It's funny, since then
Mhm.
I've really lived that way. And I'm just curious, for you, do you have a sense of being an artist and like having a sense of what that means? Have you
Yeah.
thought about that much? And like,
To be honest, the label I find a little bit scary or intimidating or something like that. But I think it's kind of, maybe it's kind of like the ineffable thing where you never, in a sense, want to have it pinned down because you're always thinking about your next thing. You're always, so I never feel, I'm always thinking about the previous. I'm like, oh, it was fine, but like I'm really focused on whatever's happening next. And because of that, I'm always reluctant to sort of come up with a label because it seems to be like, if I say I'm a poet or an artist or whatever it is, it's like it's labeling what came before. Whereas,
mm,
yeah, somehow if I can just remain anonymous, it's like
mm,
then it's like this focus on moving forward, into the unknown possibilities that I'm really excited about. So yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
Remain anonymous so that I can move towards the possibilities that I'm really excited about. That's a statement right there.
Yeah.
That's real. I mean, that strikes me to hopefully I can just remain anonymous so that I can
I
just
mean,
respond. Yes. Yes.
sorry, I obviously I didn't mean anonymous in a literal sense,
Yeah.
like, in
Yeah.
my name and so on, but I
Yeah.
I just mean in terms of the label.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, and there's that sensitivity too, because on some level, this kind of double thing about language, right? Like
Mhm.
if you're, yeah, it's like it's all in the listening, right? And so you're this is one of the things I've noticed about this is talking more about listening. It's so interesting because you hear a lot of people, if language is talked about, it's usually what gets talked about, right? Is the talking part, is is the words part, the speaking
Mhm.
part. And it kind of is like as if listening is just this thing that would happen if you stayed quiet while somebody else was talking, right? That's really that sense, but it's so interesting because in circling, one of the things that you do in circling is it's on one level, it's this practice of just like almost like a trans-rational listening of some kind, you know. And one of the things that people I watch it over and over and over again is that people once they start to focus on actually paying like listening to somebody is the moment they realize that they've never listened to anybody, like literally they've like they never heard
Mhm.
their own hearing, right? In kind of a profound way. And of course, once you hear that you haven't been listening to your listening, that you've had no
Mhm.
relationship to your listening, is the moment paradoxically listening begins, right? In that sense, because you're hearing that level. Um,
Yes.
what was there was something around that that I was moving towards. I forgot what it was. Yeah, just this sense of just oh yeah, the language. Yeah, the thing about language and that speaking, right? To say
Mhm.
traditionally always has been like listening. I think ontologically only makes sense. Speaking only makes sense if there's already always a listening, right? You can
Mhm.
imagine, like I
Mhm.
can imagine a listening without a speaking, right? I can't imagine speaking without something beckoning the speech, right?
Mhm.
So in some ways, it's like to become a really good speaker, it's always been about responding to a listening, right? That calls it
Mhm.
forth. So it's really it's just interesting. I'm really getting that sense about your work and the in some of the ways that you're talking about this is that in
Mhm.
some sense like what you're cautious about and also what you're doing, right? Like is you're listening and in some sense being an artist what I'm hearing for you is about kind of listening in repose in some way and watching how you respond, right?
Mhm.
And being
Mhm.
be in response to that. I'm
Mhm.
just appreciating what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true. Um, yeah, that sounds like a good summation.
Mhm.
um, yeah, yeah. The other thing is, I find it's just what you were saying about the feeling of not having listened to people before.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's almost like an addictive thing once you begin to listen to others or to the universe or whatever. It's so fascinating to get beyond yourself, and it's so refreshing to get beyond yourself um that you don't want to talk about yourself anymore.
Yeah, totally.
You like mm-hmm,
Yeah. So that anonymity that you're talking about, right? There's a depth to what I'm hearing you say, right? Because on some level, I think what you're that sense it's like where you really start to listen and then you're beyond yourself, right? And then
mm-hmm,
there is that sense where it's like wow, like things are a lot more interesting right than this linguistic loop I call guy, right?
mm-hmm.
But in some sense I've one of the things I've noticed is that really then like hearing guy, listening to guy or the one in which we're speaking becomes more about listening to the world in some sense that's disclosed in our listening, right? Which is always what I mean, it's one of the things Johannes has really emphasized
Mm-hmm.
in his work that I really like that you're already always in a response, right?
Yes.
You're in a response and you're also in the last conversation I had with him, he was talking about you're always already in a response or underway in a response to something that you don't understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
That whatever that is, that sense in which being already underway and responding to something, and I think
Mm-hmm.
Heidegger would talk about like the well, that's being, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's important to get that it's in some way concealed, and that there is a way where there's a sweet spot where I think that we're honing in on, like I'm hearing you honing in your work, where that there is a way where you can, in some sense, um, hear like what you don't understand, but in a way, in some senses, you could say it's like it's making the no, it's making it like it's you're hearing and presencing the unknown without making it known. That there's this way, right? Because that's the problem is like if you there's the concealedness itself, but if it's
Yes.
but if it is concealed, if you make it unconcealed in this way, you kind of no longer, it becomes concealed in some sense, right?
Yeah.
So there's this kind of tending to that, right?
Yeah, I think tending to is a really nice metaphor or adjective. Like I think that's definitely a lot what's going on. And it's kind of sort of like when I remember in philosophy, like we used to write these very analytical essays, and a friend of mine just was for shorthand, she just wrote one of the she was reading someone else's essay just as notes, and for shorthand she just put it in logic, you know. And the guy whose essay he was reading was so insulted. He was like, you know, you can't abstract from the particulars of my essay into this logical system. And I think there's a similar thing where kind of you say, what's the point of that story? Like someone tells a story and there's a few jokes in there and there's like an emotional rise and fall, whatever. And then somebody says like, what's the point? Like, how can we summarize this? And I think there's something to do with just tending to presence or tending to I'm quite interested in stories, as I kind of said before, and the sort of truth that you get through the telling of a story or through the receiving of the story, that you know it can't be abstracted from away from it afterwards, or it can't be sort of reduced logically without kind of spoiling something. So yeah
that reduction. As we're talking, I'm just noticing that there's like there's something that there's at the edges, it seems to be presencing itself for me in the conversation, right? Like is something to do with this sense of respect, right, for that. Like I'm kind of noticing I'm like, oh yeah, I'm I feel more attuned to that than I even thought I was, right? Like on some level, like, and that there is a certain way in which if we can reveal it, right? Because this is kind of this is the enframing thing, right? Is it's constantly seeing things as a resource to exploit, right? It's kind of it can't even listen, right? As it as that mode, it's just not designed to do that, right? So we get in trouble when it becomes our only mode of revealing. So there's a real way in where I'm like, I think this is one of the things that excited me about your work, and that you're doing it, and that you're speaking directly to some of these things, right? Is that at least in my lifetime, I've noticed like the amount of change in these core things that are going on from generation to generation to generation. It seemed very connected to the internet, right? And relationship and all these kinds of things, where I do get the sense that there's some kind of window closing somewhere, right? And so keeping that, I think there is a sense of an urgency to keep, I don't know if you call that the metaphysical dimension open, or like this place where the unsayable still can still get through, or still can be heard, right? And so I mean, even like Heidegger says that he thinks it's going to be a poet who saves the day, right? He's like, I only think philosopher other like it's going to be a poet.
Yeah, no, I think that, thank you. That's very kind of you to say about you know, that you found my work appealing and so on. Yeah, I don't I like I think a lot of it is just like it's just such an intuitive thing, you know, in terms of like, you know, I think, and I think there's also so much about these sorts of things that we don't understand. Like, as Heidegger would say, that we're not in control of any of it and all of that sort of thing. I think, you know, even if it can seem the case that a window is closing or opening or whatever, it, you know, it might, you know, not be the case simply because of our, you know, do you know what I mean? But yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Mm,
That sense of that quality.
mm.
Really great. Yeah, this has been really great. How's this been for you?
Yeah, that's been great. Yeah, no, it's been really interesting. Yeah, I feel very seen and heard.
Mm,
Thank you for being so
mm,
interested. Yeah,
mm.
so yeah, thanks so much for having me. And
Yeah, totally,
yeah,
totally. It's really nice to
hmm,
meet you.
yeah, you too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to share about about anything before we complete?
No, it's okay. Yeah. No, I think that's about everything. Yeah. Thanks.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll send you a link and stuff when
Okay.
I get it all recorded.
Great. Okay. Thanks a million.
All right. Nice to meet you.
Okay. Nice to meet you. Have a good day. See you now. Bye.